Recently, I've been thinking a lot about what makes a good scene. Welcome to the channel. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I make YouTube videos about writing and about being an author. So if you're into that sort of thing, hit the subscribe button and like the video while you're at it. Let's go ahead and jump right into this topic, though. What makes a good scene? I think in order to answer that question, we actually have to take a slight step backward. Because often, when we try to decide whether something is good or not, we fail because we haven't actually defined precisely what it is we're looking for. So it might be a better question, rather than what makes a good scene, to ask the question, what is the purpose of a scene? A scene is a piece of a story that advances it in some way, shape, or form. And there are three primary ways that you can advance a story. The first is through character development, the second is through plot, and the third is through world building. Let's go ahead and take each of these in turn so that we can unpack what makes a good scene. Let's talk about characters first. Some scenes only exist to show character development. It's important for any story to have good characters, to have characters that are well-rounded, to have characters that have depth, to have characters that feel as if they could be real. There's a great temptation when writing a story to make characters sort of flat, because it's easy. And if we don't want them to be flat, then we have to show them growing and developing over time. In every story, there is a subplot that runs through the entirety of the story that is the change happening in the characters. And not just the main character, in the other characters as well. If characters don't change, if they are exactly the same when you start the story to when you end the story, they become very forgettable. And if your characters are forgettable, your story is probably going to be forgettable too. Additionally, if there's never any change in the characters, when a reader arrives at that character, they're actually likely to just tune out or skip that section completely. And the reason is because the character is not engaging their mind. There's nothing to hook them into that character's journey. So we get around this by showing characters developing. And scenes are one of the ways we do this. If you have a character and they have expressed anger about a particular issue in the past, and you have a scene, and in that scene they instead express a sense of peace or maybe acceptance of whatever was going on, that might show that a character is growing. And in that particular case, the scene would be carrying out its function. The point of it is to show the character's growth. Now, you can do the same thing with the plot. The thing about a plot is it has to move from point A to point B. And often, you're going to be stopping off at point C, D, E, etc. But a story that doesn't have movement in the plot, where the plot never moves from one point to another, it never advances, it's just a flat story. There's nothing to it. There's no story there. Because story requires change. It requires advancement of plot. So another way we can determine whether a scene is good or not is if the plot advances. And that could happen in any number of ways. We might get a glimpse into what is happening behind the scenes. We might get a glimpse into what another character is doing. We might be let in on a bit of information that tells us things are progressing. We might watch the main character or any number of other characters achieve an objective that is going to drive them towards the ultimate goal. And so if your scene has some sort of plot advancement, then it's serving its purpose. It's a good scene. And then the third way that a scene can contribute to a story is if it's advancing the world building. This is a scene where the reader learns something about the world that was previously unknown, and that revelation adds to the richness of the story. It adds to the immersion of the experience. So in this case, you might see a character arriving at a new location, and there's some sort of detail that you dwell on in the scene, or you have them interact with something that contributes to the reader's overall understanding of the world. That would be a scene that achieves its purpose of building out the world for the reader. What's cool though is that you can mix these. You don't have to have every scene have a single purpose. Instead, you can have scenes stack. So you might have a scene that not only shows character development, but also drives the plot forward and simultaneously reveals something about the world that was previously hidden to increase the reader's immersion. A scene that does all three of these things isn't just achieving a single purpose, it's improving every single aspect of the story. Now, conversely, a scene that doesn't do any of these things, that doesn't show character growth, doesn't drive the plot forward, or doesn't reveal something about the world, that's not a good scene. That's a scene that is failing in all of its purposes. That's a bad scene. So how do we know whether a scene is good or bad? A really easy test is to ask the question, if I removed this scene, would it change my story in any way, shape, or form? If the answer is no, then you don't need it. You should probably cut it because it's a bad scene. If the answer is yes, it would change the story, then it's achieving some purpose. It's a good scene. Now, does that mean it's as good as it could be? Maybe not. Maybe it's only showing character development. In that case, what if you introduced something about the world? What if you introduced advancement in the plot? Scenes that only fill one of those three purposes can always be improved by adding the other two. Now, I have a question for you, and maybe this is too personal, but I'm kind of curious. Give me a self-assessment. Let me know in the comments down below. In your current work in progress, based on the criteria I just said, how many of your scenes are good scenes and how many of them are bad?